What's your opinion on Galeforce? My opinion on Galeforce, interestingly enough, is that when we were making Galeforce, I really disliked it. I thought it was really bad. And I was like, why are we making this item? Why are we giving 80 carries a dash? That doesn't seem like a good idea. This feels wrong to me. That was like what I felt when we were making it. I will say, though, that I was wrong. I was just 100% wrong. In terms of, I think Galeforce came out, it was a balanced item, and not only was it balanced, but it was very cool and very fun. So that's an item that I look back on and like, even though I initially didn't like think it would be a good idea, I actually changed my opinion after seeing it on live, and I'm like, now I'm like very much a Galeforce lover. I'm like, Galeforce is a sweet item, and I'm a big fan of it. My personal take on Galeforce is I'm not personally convinced we needed to remove it. The reason we removed Galeforce is that we felt that the reason Galeforce was okay is because it had the mythic lockout. Basically meaning that like if you got Galeforce and bought a dash on your 80 carry, you were giving up your mythic item to do it. Like your other mythic items. And so that's what made like having the dash fair. Personal take though is like I think there's a version of Galeforce that we could have that still has a dash, even without the mythic item lockout, that feels fair and feels okay. I don't think it's like we wouldn't be able to get something like that. I think it's like tunable with stats and cooldown. And just at the end of the day, it ends up being a trade-off in the item system. It's like you're taking Galeforce, then like that delays your Infinity Edge. You're taking Galeforce, that delays your Static Shiv or whatever. And so with the right stat tuning and cooldown tuning, I think we could probably get it into a spot. And so yeah, I don't know. I'm a fan of Galeforce. I thought it ended up being a really cool item. Really cool. Perhaps if it locked out other 80 carry altering items like RFC. I'm just not convinced it needs that lockout because to me, the reason I don't think it needs the lockout necessarily, and by the way, I could be wrong, like, who knows? The reason I don't think it needs the lockout is because there's already a lockout with items. It's the items you buy and how gold efficient they are, right? And so if you're spending 3,000 gold into Galeforce, that's 3,000 gold you're not spending elsewhere. And if that 3,000 gold comes at the cost of damage or something else, right? Like that could be a big deal. It's kind of like how like Hextech Protobelt isn't necessarily an unbalanced item either, right? Because it comes with costs. It does feel like full tank Malphite has more damage than half the 80 carries at most points in the game. So one thing that tanks can do is they can kill you before you kill them, right? Like if a full tank Malphite finds a squishy 80 carry, it has a high likelihood that that full tank Malphite will jump on the 80 carry and be able to kill it before the 80 carry kills him. But that doesn't necessarily mean that Malphite is doing more damage than an 80 carry. That means that Malphite has a lot of burst. Or a lot of low sustained damage, but it turns out that when you're a squishy 80 carry, most characters with any amount of real damage can kill you eventually, because you're squishy. Mundo, 591. So a fun fact about Mundo is Mundo is not classified as a tank. Mundo is a juggernaut who is intended to do a ton of damage. Now, he does happen to build full tank, so I understand the dissonance there. But the thing about Mundo is like, Mundo's like profile is a guy who is this beefy ball of stats that says, I'm going to run at you like a juggernaut and then fight you there. It's like, we expect Mundo to do damage in the same way that we expect Nasus to do damage and Darius to do damage, Olaf to do damage, characters like that. Mundo's class is Juggernaut. And so just noting that like, there are some characters in the game who can build tanky and do the most damage, Mundo potentially being one of them. But I'll note that I would not consider Mundo a real tank because he brings very little utility to a team. The only thing that Mundo really tends to bring to the team is his presence and his damage. Like, if Mundo didn't do damage, he wouldn't be a champion, if that makes sense. Like, he has to do damage. Am I wrong, or do I feel like tanks are overtuned? A semi-fed tank feels like an assassin. One taps you if you're a major 80 carry. I guess the question for me is, what do you mean by one tap? And I think that's a very important distinction. And the reason I ask that question is, if you're saying kills you at the speed that Zed would kill you, that would probably be pretty bad. And so if a tank is coming in and from full health killing you as fast as Zed, I'd be like, yeah, that's probably pretty suspect. If you're saying one tap in that you died from full over 5 seconds, that's not a one tap. And in League of Legends, 5 seconds is an eternity. And depending on the situation, I don't necessarily think it is wrong for a tank to be able to do that. you know, again, it depends on the situation though. But like if you're an AD carry and there's a tank on the enemy team, and the tank gets on you and it's 1v1 and you can't kill it and it kills you from full over a decent amount of time, I don't necessarily think the answer there is, oh, that tank needs to be nerfed. It might be like, well, what was the situation? Like, where was your team? Who's helping you peel them? Things like that. I don't think it's incorrect for a tank to be able to kill you from full over an extended period of time. Now, instantly burst you down the way like a Zed would? Yeah, that's probably more suspect. One thing I really like that Diablo 4 did is they made it so respecking early is cheap and respecking later is expensive. This means that you can experiment in the early game and any mistakes you make aren't going to ruin your life. Whereas in the late game, you're more committed to a build. I think that was pretty good and smart and well done by Diablo 4. And so with the gold respecking in Path of Exile 2, my hope is that something similar is going on, where early game, if you want to respec and try new stuff, you can, and it's not going to be super punishing, but then as the game progresses, you get more set into a build. But that's everywhere, same in Borderlands. Borderlands, I would say my impression of Borderlands was respecking was trivial always. So yes, the cost of respecking in Borderlands went up over time, but I'll just say my personal impression when I played it was that respecking was basically always cheap, even though the cost would increase marginally. The difference is in Diablo, like respecking actually got to the point where it was actually like somewhat expensive. Meaning that there was some friction in changing builds. What do you think of Dota 2 talents? I think they're incredibly cool. Same thing with HOTS. HOTS talents, Dota 2 talents. I think they're very cool and compelling systems. I'm a big fan of them. I think they're way better than runes too. Like, if you've come to my stream enough, you probably know that I'm not the biggest fan of runes and how they've like turned out over the long run. To me, I think talents are like the cool version of runes. Now, of course, they have a lot more upkeep cost because, you know, you have to make them for every single character. One sec. They have a lot more upkeep costs because you have to make them for every single character, but I think at the end of the day, they end up doing like what runes kind of want to do. One of the hard parts of the rune system is that when you make a rune, it becomes a property of that class of champions who can take it, which can often be very, very bad. So what I mean by that as a property is, as an example, if we give Conqueror true damage, anybody who takes Conqueror has true damage, which means essentially every single bruiser and skirmisher in the game counters tanks by default because of the rune. This happened. Conqueror at one point had true damage, and it made tanks feel really, really, really bad because, like, basically half the bruisers in the game just countered them just by default. And so, like, that's the rough part about a rune, is that if you give something cool on a rune, it becomes a property of everybody who takes it. And the thing is like, it's a property of everybody who takes it. What's the word I'm looking for here? It's a property of everybody who takes it. The difference between a rune and like a talent is it's for that one character, and you can tune it to have trade-offs versus the other talents that character could take, and it won't affect other characters. So like, let's say I made a talent for a character like Yasuo that said you do true damage. It's like, okay, well that's us saying we want Yasuo to do true damage, whereas in a rune like Conqueror doing true damage means all bruisers have to do true damage, right? And so I'm generally just a big fan of talents. I think they're really, really cool because it lets you do the cool things that runes do without necessarily having to worry as much about the global systemic effects that like making a rune will have on the entire roster. And that said, obviously it comes with costs. Like, one of the big costs, of course, is you have to make them for every single character, and there's a lot of upkeep and maintenance that goes along with that. But I don't know. Playing HOTS, playing Dota, I think talents are really, really cool and a lot of fun.